The Lord has done some remarkable things in my life, and of all people, I feel least worthy. It's very difficult for me to tell the story that I'm about to tell you and not cry like a baby. It's very difficult for me not to become very emotional about what God did in my life, because it is so just incredible that He would use me. Sometimes when we're in the middle of a struggle, we look up and say, "Why me?" Oh, don't look at me in that tone of voice. Yes, I do. Okay? And then there are times when God moves and you go, "Whoa, why me?" And that's where I'm at. I've done both. Why me? Why me? And God has been faithfully good. I grew up in the Assemblies of God. In fact, we were on Facebook this week. And Pastor Phil had gone back and found people who had signed as ministerial credentials in Hot Springs 100 years ago. And my grandfather was there too. So we're both blue bloods, right? And having grown up blue blood Assemblies of God, for me to wind up with Southern Baptist, that's interesting. I would tell you how that happened, but we'd be here till that meeting on Wednesday night. It took a while, but God opened the door. And I wound up on the staff at First Southern Baptist Church in Houston, Texas, with Dr. John Bisagno. He was there for 30 years as senior pastor, and I was there 26 of them as director of married young adults. We were a great team. I was his right hand. I knew how John would think. I would know. I could anticipate what he wanted to do, because the way he would do things is exactly how I would have done it had I been the senior pastor. So it was very easy for me to know how to work with him. And it's very unusual for staff to stick around for 26 years. That doesn't usually happen. We had a music director that was there 25. We had a children's pastor that was there 28. We had a youth pastor that was there 18. When you get a cohesive staff that stays together, you actually get a chance to know the people to whom you're ministering, the families, and you have an impact on lives. First Baptist Church Houston grew from about 3,000 when I got there to 26,000 when I left. And that growth was one of those periods of times where the numbers really didn't mean anything. We were literally seeing God change people's lives. I had fun when Dr. Bisagno was interviewed by NBC News when they'd gotten wind of what happened to me. Somehow or other, secular media has a belief that Baptists have no concept of the miraculous. They just have no concept of what that means. And I got the biggest kick when the interview, the reporter asked him, "Well, were you surprised when God touched Duane?" And Brother John looked at him and said, "Well, no." He said, "I see lives changed every week." It's just your perspective, okay, on things. So I served there for 26 years. As I said, my job title was Director of Married Young Adults. My job description, on the other hand, was putty. If there's a hole, fill it. And I've done everything at that church, including preach on Sunday morning and carry out trash. There isn't anything that we haven't done. That was my church. When you're director of married young adults, think about this for a minute. I had the married families that were between the ages of 20 and 40. Those were my charges directly. Now, all of those folks are the ones who have the babies in the nursery, the children in the children's department, the teenagers, and their parents are the seniors. So when you're the director of the married young adults, you got the hub of the church. Okay, that's where you are. You don't plan to do all those other ministries, but you putty, and you wind up doing it. So I was very much the core part of that. Now, anybody in here grow up Southern Baptist? Anybody Baptist roots? Oh, be proud. Come on. Yes, thank you very much. I'm tickled to death where I'm at, right? God gave me an open door and I walked through it and I'm never ashamed. But now let me ask you this. If you grew up Southern Baptist, you know we're about Sunday school, right? Baptists don't go to church. We go to Sunday school, stay to church. It's all one word. Go to Sunday school, stay to church. That's what we take up our offering in Sunday school. The only reason we pass the plate in church is for the ones who didn't make it that morning. That's it. Okay? That's for the visitors, because those of us who are members, we fill out the little thing and we check off the boxes and we put our offering in the envelope and we give it in Sunday school. How many of you know I'm telling the truth? That's what we do. That's us. So Sunday school was part of us. Baptists also have a thing that staff is around to coach. We don't do things, we coach. We train you. We really believe in that. So we had a policy at First Baptist that said, staff never teaches Sunday school. Never. Not under any circumstances, not for any reason. We don't teach. We train, coach, let you do it, we assist. Baptist thing. However, we had one very large Sunday school class called the Catacombs class. Got its name because it had started in the basement of the church. Outgrown that. And on a given Sunday morning, it run 200 or 300 people. Well, the teacher became ill one Sunday morning, and they had to take him to the hospital. And after he was gone, they were trying to find somebody to just finish up the class that morning, and they couldn't lay their hands on anybody quickly, so they called Putty to go down and fill in. And so I went down and filled in that Sunday school class, and I wound up filling in there for the next 6 years. They wouldn't let me be the teacher because that was against policy. And you know how Baptists are about policy, right? Listen, when you get to heaven, it'll be a Baptist checks you in, I promise. We know more about committees and cards and assignments than anybody. We do that well. That's what we do. Now, it will definitely be a charismatic that leads praise and worship, right? Charismatics have got that down perfectly. That's how that works. We get to heaven, it'll be Episcopalians that process and lead us in, because they know how to do that very well. They do that. And the Romans will serve communion, because they've been doing that for a few thousand years. They know what to do with that, right? Methodists will move us around once every couple of years. Presbyterians will pay for it. But heaven's going to be a wonderful place when we get there. I always do that because it's fun. You know what's fun? We've all got stereotypes, right? And the tragedy is we believe those stereotypes. Let me give you some good news this morning. The family of God's a whole lot bigger than you think it is. There are people in every tradition that may worship in a different style than you do, but they love Jesus just as intensely as you do. And one of the joys of my ministry has been to be able to move among the traditions and to be able to share the power of God. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I taught that class for 6 years, and we became pretty bonded. I got a call from First Southern Baptist Church in Brenham, Texas, to come and be the senior pastor. That would have been in 1986. Now, Brenham, Texas is famous for Bluebell. Now, it's not Bluebell ice cream, it's Bluebell. There's a difference between Bluebell and ice cream. There's Bluebell and there's everything else. That's how that works. How many of you have had Bluebell? How many of you have never had Bluebell? If you had never had Bluebell, I was going to pray right now. Okay? That's all there is to it. I love Bluebell, you can tell. Okay? And so when you get a call from a church in Brenham, Texas, to come be the senior pastor, darling, you don't even have to pray about that decision. You just grab a bowl and a spoon and go to Brenham. I mean, that's what you do. And so I agreed to become the senior pastor of that church. And my Sunday school class wasn't just thrilled with that decision. They kind of wanted me to hang around and fill in until Jesus comes, I guess. But I decided I would go, that God was in that, and that's where we needed to be. Now, I need to tell you about Brenham. Brenham, well, anybody grow up in Texas in a county seat? Anybody grow up? I don't know about Arkansas, but in a county seat in Texas, First Baptist Church is always on the square. That's just culture. It's a cultural thing. First Baptist is there. Now, there's always a blue-collar church. That's Calvary. It'll be someplace else, but First Church is on the square in the county seat. That's Texas, Southern Baptist. First Methodist will be across the street or next door. Okay? That's just how that works. And in between them will be the Masonic Lodge. Anyway, all of that is just a cultural thing. It's how it works. When you get called to First Church in a county seat in Texas, you understand the culture. Okay? You understand what's there. That church was the third oldest Southern Baptist church in the state. Sam Houston had been baptized in that church. Now, he joined Independence, which is a Baptist thing. You get baptized here, you join over there. You don't know why that is, but it works like that. But he had joined another church, but he was baptized in what was to become First Baptist Church of Brenham. Had a long history. R.E.B. Baylor, for whom the university is named, was the first pastor of that church. So when I joined the staff and my picture went up on that wall, I was in some tall cotton. Went to the church. First Sunday morning, I'm going to be introduced as the senior pastor, my first preaching Sunday. When I walked out on the platform, now we are one of these churches that had two sections and a center aisle, and it went forever that way. You know what the ones I'm talking about? Long in there. I could have stood at the pulpit, fired my rifle. The bullet would have hit the floor before it got to the back door. You know what I'm talking about, right? Red carpet, all the pews, privacy rails, everything is walnut. And I don't mean walnut veneer. I mean walnut. We had an organ that was worth more than the rest of our buildings, right? And our second string organist had a master's degree in organ, right? And he was second string. That's the church. So I'm walking in. I walked in a little door onto the platform. And as I walked out here, I noticed that the first 3 pews down here were filled with people from my Sunday school class in Houston. Now, do you understand that in a church on County Seat, Square, First Church, new pastor, Sunday morning, filling up an entire pew as a visitor, probably not a good idea? Likely somebody bought and paid for that pew. They got their name on the end of it on a brass plaque. How many of you been in that church? You know what I'm talking about? That was us, right? And they're down there, they're all just giving it this. And I'm thinking, oh man. See, they never did have any respect for me. I was just Duane. I was just one of them. And they're down there and they're laughing. And please, I appreciate how we're dressed today. I do. I'm comfortable like this. And this is how we were dressed, because this is how we dressed at First Church in Houston. But when you're at First Church on the County Seat on the Square, and the first Sunday that the pastor's going to be there, you put a tie on and you dress up. So everybody else is dressed up except these 3 pews. Came my turn to preach. I walked up to the pulpit. I laid my Bible down. I got just about here with my first word as the senior pastor of this august little group. And they draped a banner over the privacy rail down here that read, "Love you, yes. Forgive you, never." Now, I've got a choir sitting up here wondering, who are these people? What are they doing in our church? That began my tenure at First Baptist Church in Brenham. I served that church for the next 4 years, and I loved it. The church didn't always agree with what I wanted to do. That's okay. Everybody has a right to be wrong. No problem. But we had a great time. I loved Brenham, and I loved having fun with it. I will tell you this, over the next 4 years as I served that congregation, probably 5 out of every 9 Sundays, just a little bit over half the time, somebody from that Sunday school class at Houston drove 70 miles one way just to worship with us on Sunday morning. There was a bond that had developed between us that maintains to this very day. In fact, I can tell you that about 20 minutes ago, they prayed for you. That Sunday school class to this day knows my itinerary, knows where I'm going to be, and they pray for every congregation when they know I'm going to share the story. And their prayer will have gone something along this line: God, I hope the people, and I pray that the people today that hear Duane's story will have their lives affected and changed the way ours has been affected and changed. They're a pretty remarkable group. They're our family in our support group, and they maintain that to this day. Well, the 4 years I served in Brenham were wonderful. I got up one Sunday morning in January of 1990, and I had that feeling you get when you know you're coming down with something. I'm not just bedridden sick yet, but just give me a minute, right? I'll be there before the day is over. That's the feeling. Throat scratchy, just don't feel like doing anything. And frankly, I would like to have stayed home that morning. I was at that point, but I didn't have any putty down there at the church, and we had 2 services on Sunday morning at 8:30 and 11. And I had planned my sermon around a song. Now, I began singing professionally when I was 16. So music was a part of me a long time before preaching became the focus of what I do. So every now and then I'll take a song and I'll take a sermon outline and sort of put them together and preach, sing my message. And that's what I had planned that morning. Well, at 8:30 I tried to do that. Didn't feel good, sure didn't sound good. So at 11 o'clock I just got through it as best I could with the outline and went home. Was feeling wretched. Went back to church on Sunday night and was ready to do the service, trying to do the service, but I felt horrible. My chairman of my deacons, Charlie Mattias, Charlie came up to me and he said, "Preacher, you look wretched." I said, "Thanks, Charlie. You don't look so swell yourself." He was an old football coach, so we'd had a great time together. And Charlie said, "Preach, go home." He said, "Let's pray for you and just go home, go to bed. You're sick. Get out of here. Go away. I'll handle the service." And I said, okay, now I have to tell you, we were on cable TV in Brenham in Washington County, and so every one of our services was televised. So I went home, and I went to bed, and I watched that night on TV. And my chairman of my deacons had a sermon outline tucked in the back of his outline, and he preached that night. Now I got to tell you something. That's deacon. All right? Deacons are supposed to be a support for their pastor. That's what deacons are about. And Charlie absolutely personified that night, and I've sung his praises all over this country ever since, because there aren't a lot of Charlies. There are a lot of others, but there aren't a lot of Charlies. And that night, this pastor was thrilled. Well, I endured the flu for the next 7-8 days. Everybody in here's had the flu at one time or another. And when you get the flu, you've had it before, you know what it is. You know you've got the flu. You know if you go to the doctor, it's going to cost you about 50, 60 bucks. It'll take about 7 days to take the medication that he tells you to take, and you'll get over it. If you don't go to the doctor, and you don't take the medication, and you don't take the money, pay the money, it takes about a week. That's pretty good for Arkansas. I thought maybe it'd take till Tuesday for that to sink in. I'm tickled to death. I really didn't think anything about it, honestly. I've had it before, I've got it again, I'll get over it, we're good. But I didn't get over it. After about 10 days, all of the intestinal symptoms cleared up. But I was still left with this horribly sore throat. I couldn't even eat Bluebell. Now that's sore throat, trust me. I called a friend of mine in Houston that's a specialist, and I asked him to see me. He said, sure. And I went in to see him. He tried to scope my throat. It was so swollen he couldn't even get the scope down. He said, Duane, it's a wonder you can breathe. No wonder you can't eat. You can't get anything past it. It's just swollen almost completely shut. He found infection in my bronchi that was rampant, so he put me on some medication for that, put me on some steroids to reduce the swelling, and he sent me home and told me to stay in bed for the next 10 days. I did. Came back to him at the end of that period of time. The swelling in my throat was gone. The soreness in my throat was gone. The infection in my bronchi had cleared, but I was left with a pressure in my throat. The only way I know to describe is to tell you to grab your windpipe right here and squeeze it. And if you try to talk at the same time, that's what I sounded like. And that's what it felt like in my throat for the next 3 years of my life. And I wondered, who signed me up for that? I mean, come on, God, you gave me my education. My resume reads right. I'm in the prime years of my ministry. What's going on? Who signed me up for this? Well, my friend thought he knew what was wrong with me immediately, but he wanted someone to corroborate his diagnosis. So he called Baylor College of Medicine, and they agreed to take me as a patient. Baylor College of Medicine, Houston, very famous, especially in the area of otolaryngology and otolaryngology neurology. They do that. They write the textbooks. So when they agreed to take me as a patient, that's Mecca. I couldn't be in a better place. That's it. And they agreed to take me on. The first thing we did, we spent 3 months ruling out cancer. First thing they thought I had, because of the pressure that I was feeling in my throat, they were concerned that I had a tumor or tumors that were growing. So we went through everything. I mean, I had CAT scans and dog scans. I had MRIs, MBAs, MTV. I don't know. I had it all, I think, at one point or another. I'll never forget when my lead physician came running into me at the end of all of that, and he said, Duane, I don't know what... Pardon me, I've been fighting cold since Christmas. Anybody else? He said, I don't know what is wrong with you, but I can tell you what is not wrong with you. You don't have cancer. You don't know what relief is until you find out it's not the C word. And I said, Doc, that's awesome. What do I do now? He said, Duane, I want you to take a leave of absence from the church. Well, it's now May. I've been out of the pulpit since January. Leave of absence. Okay, a couple of weeks. What? I want you to take 6 months off. From now? From now. I want you to leave Brenham. I want you to leave Texas. I want you to go someplace where you know nobody. I don't want you to be around anybody that you know, because for the next 6 months, I want you to be totally silent. Now, if you spend any time with me at all, you'll find out that I don't be silent. Okay? I be talking, is what I be doing. I'm a communicator. At that point in time, I had an afternoon drive time talk show. I was doing television with our church twice, 3 times a week. I was teaching conferences. I was preaching in the church. God was blessing what we were doing. Be silent 6 months? Have you lost it? But I'll tell you something else. When your whole future hangs in the balance, you're willing to try whatever is recommended. How many of you remember, no, you're a pretty young congregation, 2 or 3 of us will remember magic slates. Remember those with the little wooden stylus and wax paper and write on it? Go try to find one of those, right? Good luck. My sweetheart went with me, and we were gone from the church. After I met with them, they said, "Preacher, get out of here and go get well. We're on your side." Came and we left, and we were gone for 6 months. And I'll tell you the truth, I was good. I was silent for 6 months. I was scared. Anybody who tells you they're not is lying to you. You don't know what's wrong with you. Medical science is now trying things, and medical science doesn't ever tell you what it is. They eliminate what it isn't. Till they get down to, it must be, and that's how it is. We're gone 6 months. Was perfectly good. Came back to Houston. We arranged to come in on a Friday. We drove directly to the medical center. Went into the doctor's office. Went into the examining room. Anybody ever ask a doctor why they keep those exam rooms at 38 degrees? And then they pull out this paper that they've kept in the freezer, right? And then they put this thing on that has no back and want you to sit on it. I don't understand that, but that's just how doctors do it in the office. So I'm sitting there shivering, and I'll never forget when he came in the door, and I don't know why I remember it this way and so clearly, but he had a roll of papers in his hand. And it was rolled up like this, and he had them up in the air. I don't know why that either. I have no idea. It's just the way it was. And I focused, I remembered it. And he's grinning from ear to ear, and he says, "All right, Duane, let's hear it." And I said, "Hi, Doc." And my voice was exactly the same as the day I had walked out 6 months before. It wasn't any different, wasn't any worse, wasn't any better, had not changed at all. And he watched my countenance drop. And he said, "Duane, we got a lot of work to do. Don't panic. Don't get discouraged. It's going to be okay." And I remember just kind of waving at him and saying, "Doc, I just need to know one thing." And he said, "What?" And I said, "Am I ever going to get to preach again?" And he looked at me and he was very serious. And he said, "Duane, that's one question I cannot answer. Anything I would say to you at this point is speculation. Because until I get a clear diagnosis of your problem, I can't begin treatment. And until I get you into treatment, I can't give you a prognosis for the success of that treatment. So at this point, I don't know." Went home on that Friday, Saturday, Sunday morning came for church. Went to see the congregation. So many of the folks we hadn't seen in 6 months. And I love my congregation. I have to tell you, something you need to know. Pastors need you a whole lot worse than you need pastors. There's something that God does in the heart of a pastor, and he falls in love with the congregation. And folks, that they just become part of you. It sticks. And I had missed people from my congregation, the Charlies and many others. And when I got to church that morning, they could tell that the voice wasn't good. Came time to preach, and I walked up to that same pulpit, and we had a microphone that came up out of the pulpit like this, and I leaned into that microphone and put it almost on my lips, and I croaked out to them as best I could what the doctors had told me on Friday. There was no guarantee I would ever preach again. And I looked at those sweet folks and I said, "Listen, guys, it's been almost a year. You need a pastor. You need someone to be here with you. And I don't know that I'm ever going to get to do that again." And I resigned my church that morning. And I have to tell you, that's the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. See, it's real easy for me to stand up here and tell you to trust God. It's another thing to trust God. And there's a difference between believing God and trust God. The devils believe in God and tremble. Trust God is when nothing's happening, though he slay me, yet will I serve him, Job. That's trust God. I don't see it happening, but I know in whom I have believed. That's trust God. There's a huge difference between believing God and trusting God. I hear a lot of messages on believing God. I want to hear some more on trusting God. I have respect, more respect, not for the people in the first part of Hebrews 11, but the ones at the end of the chapter. Those are the ones I have respect for. Those are the ones who trusted God. I resigned. Both of my children were students at Baylor. I had no idea how we were going to keep the kids in school. I didn't know how we were going to live. Everything that I have ever done to make a living has been connected to my ability to communicate. That's what I do. This is my toolbox. I don't work with my hands. I'm one of those guys that can take a simple oil change and turn it into a $300 repair bill. No problem, okay? I don't fix stuff. That's not my thing. You don't want me wherever you're working. The best thing I can do for you is go to another county. That's just not my thing. I'm a job creator. I call somebody. Come and fix it. That's just who I am. What am I going to do? My sweetheart is trained in radiology. Before we were married, she finished her schooling and she worked a little bit, but it had been 15 years since she had worked outside our home. We had been very blessed that she'd been able to be home and raise our children. And we recognized the blessing. We were grateful to God that she'd been able to do that. But suddenly she's going to have to become the breadwinner in our family because I had no idea. I could not even flip burgers. You know how hard it is to understand somebody on that thing going through the drive-thru at McDonald's? Can you imagine to start with? I couldn't do it. I had a friend that had a bunch of franchises. I could have done that for him. At least it was a job. Except I couldn't do it. I couldn't communicate from the kitchen to the front to tell him that I got the order. It was ridiculous, but that's how it was. So suddenly my sweetheart is thrust back in the job market. I got to tell you something. She's not here this morning. She's with her daddy. He had some surgery done in Springfield, Missouri on Thursday. So yesterday I ran her up to Springfield before I came down here and dropped her off so she could spend some time with her father. But I got to tell you about her. If she was here, she'd get real nervous right now and real upset because she hates it when I do this. But my wife had to go compete. She was trained in analog. Some of you know what that is. Most of you do not. She was trained in analog radiology, and now everything's digital, just like everything else. She was competing for a job with kids who were coming out of college that had been trained in the latest equipment and techniques, and her last job had been 15 years ago. And she's putting together a resume and going out trying to find a job. Okay? That's serious stuff. But I never one time heard my sweetheart complain. Never. Not once. Never a whine. At a time when both of her children went off to college and life should have been getting a little easier, it got more complicated than it had ever been. But there was never any negativity that came from my bride. She just did what she had to do. I'm going to tell you something. When we stood in front of an altar and looked in each other's eyes and promised for richer, for poorer, and sickness and health, we meant it, and she demonstrated it. Okay? I'm not going to tell you if you've been through a divorce that God's abandoned you. He has not. But I am going to tell you this. If you're not married and you're considering marriage, don't forget the vows that you make. They're real. Okay? And they matter. And I'm proud of my sweetheart. I don't just love her. I respect her for what she has done. I have to brag and tell you one thing. After she went to work for a large clinic in Houston. Kelsey Sleevold is the one that does NASA, among other things. She became the first radiology tech that was board certified in every specialty. She became the first one they'd ever had. And she did all of that after the age of 27. I'm not stupid. I finally found a job. A friend of mine who was in that Sunday school class was a private investigator. He had a contract with the FDIC. Remember when we went through the savings and loan crisis and the bank crisis and everything was being repossessed and all of that? Well, the FDIC had given him a contract as a private investigator to investigate every loan portfolio. When the FDIC takes over a bank, they have to literally go through every single loan, find the documentation, find the collateral, verify it, make sure it's good. That has to be done. That's part of it. Well, he had the contract to do that. And WT remembered that I had done title work years ago, and I knew how. And essentially, that's what this is title work. So I could go do that. I could go to the courthouse and go down to that musty old record basement room and look that stuff up and write my reports on computer, and I didn't have to talk to anybody. It was great. I had a job. Now look, it wasn't what I was called to do. And frankly, it wasn't what I cared to do. But it was what I could do. And I was grateful to God that I could do something. Ladies, when you get together and you have a conversation, you can talk about the kids, you can talk about clothes, you can talk about recipes, you can talk about your job. There are 100 things women talk about. There are only 3 that men talk about: the weather, sports, and what do you do? Okay? Because our entire identity is wrapped up in that. And when I couldn't do anything, I'm lost. I am totally lost. So I found something I could do. And I went to work for him. And shortly after he brought me on, he sold the business, moved to Marble Falls, and I was able to get that contract that he had with the FDIC. And suddenly I'm a full-blown private investigator. Have no idea what I'm doing except one thing, and that's title work, and I've only got one client, federal government. Doesn't that figure? And I want to thank you. I'm a product of your tax money. Thank you so very much. But I did that for 3 years, guys. And it kept the kids in school. And it kept me alive. And all the time I was working, I was seeing the doctors at Baylor, and we were going through all kinds of stuff. They thought I had MS. They thought I had myasthenia gravis. They thought I had syndromes. They thought I had problems. We went through all kinds of stuff. And they kept a video record every time I would see them of my throat. Did you know that all the noise you make comes through a hole about the size of a dime in your windpipe? Let me give you this. Did you know that all the noise your kids and grandkids make? That's it. It never gets any bigger than that. That's all there is. As air moves up from your diaphragm, there are tiny little membranes on each side that vibrate in that air. There are muscles around the outside that move them back and forth, and that's how you make sound. Now that's horribly oversimplified, but that's the essence of it. Well, mine didn't move back and forth. They didn't vibrate. They just hung there. Okay? If they had been paralyzed, that's pretty normal. They see that a lot, and there's a treatment for that, Botox. For what it's worth, Botox was not invented for wrinkles. It was actually invented for vocal cords. That's what it was invented for in the first place. They can put the Botox in there, and if something is paralyzed, it'll relax. But mine were already limp, and they couldn't do anything about that. That's why I became a guinea pig. Before all this was over, I've seen 200 of the best physicians in the world in that field and their teams. Not because I'm a star, but because my condition was so unusual, everybody wanted to take a shot at it. That's the truth. And you know what? I wanted them to shoot. Just knock yourself out. Give me the best you got. And God was at work all the way through all that, and I didn't know it. I was still feeling like, why me? And the reality is, He was setting things up. When I did the Oprah show, she asked me, why did it take God 3 years? And I had a great answer for her, but I wouldn't have had it not taken 3 years. Now you're all sitting there wondering, what did she ask? That's the idea. Now you're staying with me. It's called a tease in media. Doctors are working with me. The one thing that happened in my throat, right above your vocal cords, there are 2 little pieces of fat called false cords. When you get laryngitis, hoarse, your throat is swollen because it's irritated. And when it swells, those false cords start beating together above the vocal cords, and you sound like this instead of like that. But I couldn't sound like this. This was all I had because these didn't work. So I talked with these. And they're not designed to sustain speech. Over a period of time, I abraded them. Remember what an abrasion is? When you skin your knee? Well, that's what both sides of my throat look like. And ultimately, in those abrasions, scar tissue formed. Have you ever watched on public television when a flower opens up and blossoms? And they've got that slow motion photography, and you watch all that? Well, we've got that of my throat with scar tissue forming. Isn't that glorious? First of all, you see it clear, then you see the abrasions, then you see the scar tissue, and you see it multiply all over my throat. And there was scar tissue all over my throat. All that Baylor has on video that they shot. Every time a doctor would come to town, then we'd shoot more video, add it to it. Listen, we could do a 90-minute special with my throat. We've got a ton. Doctors come to a conclusion. I'm wondering for 3 years, what is it? They finally told me, Duane, what you have, we're going to call spasmodic dysphonia. And I got really excited. And I said, yes, we've got a name, we know what to do. The thought in my mind is, if we know what it is, we know how to treat it. We know what to do with it. We can get better. We can move forward. Something's going to happen. Yes! And then the doctor said, now, let me tell you what that is. Spasmodic dysphonia is the great big bucket into which we kick everything we can't explain any other way. Who signed me up for that? I mean, come on, God, you give me hope and then you yank it out from under me. What are you doing to me? I don't get it. I've trusted about all I can trust. One good thing happened. April 1992. I'm in that Sunday school class I had gone back to. When we resigned the church for what's, oh, thanks, I've forgotten I had that over. Thank you. When we resigned the church, I'll tell you a little quickie. When we resigned the church, that Sunday school class that had filled 3 pews, they got wind on Saturday morning we were going to move and had arranged for movers. Instead, they canceled the movers. I didn't know it, but they showed up in Brenham with bodies and trucks, and they're the ones that moved us back.